Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to score 760 on the GMAT. My name is Rajat Sidana. I am one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. Along with me, I have Sandeep. Sandeep is a GMAT strategy expert, and he is going to be our co-host today. In this webinar, we talk about how do you create a study plan to get to a high GMAT score. And that could be 710, 720, 740, 760, or even higher. Then we talk about how do you track whether you are on that study plan, whether you're executing on that study plan or not. And then lastly, we talk about the importance of core skills. You can have a plan, you can have tools to track it as well, but you still need to make sure that you study properly so that you actually attain that improvement. So creating a study plan, creating a tracking strategy, and then studying in the right appropriate manner are three aspects of the webinar that we cover. And to do so, we do solve a couple of questions, one in quant, one in verbal. And to make sure that you're able to solve those questions well, we did send a few video lessons your way. Video lessons in verb, PD modifiers, and boldface are the two that we'd be using during this webinar. If you've not gone through these video lessons, I would strongly recommend that you go through them post this webinar. Also, we have some upcoming free webinars. We have a quant workshop. Think of it as a proctored quant test in which we first evaluate your current quant score, and then we give you a strategy as to where should you invest your time in the next 20 days to attain maximum improvement. So if you're someone who comes out as a Q45 student, we'll tell you how can you go from a Q45 to first Q49 and then to Q50. If your evaluation comes out as a Q40, we then talk about which are the areas that you need to focus on to get to a Q46, Q47 first, and then the second stage to a Q50 or so. So a really popular workshop. If you've not registered for that, definitely do that. And then we have a free webinar on how to ace GMAT sentence correction by focusing on meaning and logic. Probably our most popular webinar. This webinar is hosted by Payal Tandon, who's GMAT Club's or who was GMAT Club's top-rated expert in the year 2018. So again, if you haven't registered for that one, this is a week from now. Do register for that as well. And let's kind of understand, get to know you guys a bit more. So the one question that we had asked us was, when do you plan to take the GMAT? And based on the data that I have over here, the biggest group is those who have between a month and a half to 2.5 months. And we have two similarly sized groups, those who have the GMAT in a month to 45 days, and those who haven't taken the data as of yet. And lastly, we have a few people who have the GMAT right away or between a couple of weeks to a month. Now, with regards to the target GMAT scores, let's get a few more data points, and then let's also figure out what your current GMAT scores are. What's the range of that current GMAT score that this group has? Now, with regards to the target GMAT scores, what I really see is that two almost similarly sized groups, a good number of you aim to score a 760 or higher. That's really good. If you're looking for a scholarship or a fellowship, that probably is the score that you should aim for, the 750, 760 scores. And then a good number of you are in the 730 to 750 range as well. As well as in the 710, 720 range. In fact, about 70% of the class, or 72, 73% of the class is upwards of 730. And only about 3% of this group is in the 600 to 700, or 4% in 600 to 700 range. And with regards to the current GMAT scores, what I really see is the biggest segment is in the 510 to 550 range. And then we also have a similar number of people in the 610 to 650 range as well. Okay, the one thing which I really like about this group is, well, that's changing. I was going to say the biggest, the fact that I don't know my current score is not the biggest segment, but that's just changed as I was talking about it. All right, so for those of you who don't know your current score, definitely take a mock test and reach out to us if you want to take a mock test. That will give you insights that no other mock test would. With that, let's go right into the webinar pane. The screen will be in the process or will have changed for you depending on which part of the world you are in. When the screen does change, you should be seeing GMAT strategy session, you'd be seeing an agenda, and then you should be seeing my picture. Okay, I'm going to give you guys another 10 to 15 seconds to for the screen to change. And then below the screen, you'll see a Q&A or a question and answer pod. If you have any questions, you're welcome to post those questions in the Q&A pod. And then that way, either I or Sandeep can respond to those questions. All right. There's essentially three parts of this webinar. In the first part, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to e-GMAT. That's going to be about 15 minutes. In the second part, we're going to get into the core of this webinar. We're going to talk about how do you create that strategy, how do you track it, and then how do you make sure that you study the right way so that you successfully execute on that. And then towards the end, if there still are questions that have not been answered, we'll reserve some time for what we call as an open-ended Q&A. In this open-ended Q&A, we welcome you to ask any question that you have about your GMAT preparation or about your B-School application. And the reason why we have this open-ended Q&A is so that during the session, the questions that you ask are more relevant to the topics that are being talked about. So that allows us to get through the session on time. And then, if you have questions which do not directly pertain to the session, you can always reserve those towards the end and ask those questions over there. So I asked this question early on, what's your target GMAT score? And upward the 70% of the folks said that they aim to score 730 or higher. And statistically, when you look at it, only 6% of the people get to that score of 720 or higher. And again, you can look up the stats on GMAC.com. And this is despite the fact that B schools continue to demand higher and higher median scores. Okay, this data is from fall of last year or September 2018 or so. What is it that people who get to those scores do? A good percentage of them use e-GMAT. Why do we say that? If you look at the key stats on major forums, one is the number of verified reviews, and the second is the number of success stories that have been posted over the last 12 months. What you're going to find is that when you compare e-GMAT against all the other major prep companies, more reviews and more success stories have been posted for e-GMAT than all of these other test prep companies combined. So what makes our students more successful? I think there's one thing that makes our students more successful than students from any other prep company is the architecture of our learning that we provide, or our approach, or how we think about approaching your GMAT preparation. Let's understand what are the key architectures of learning that exist today, and how does one architecture of the learning compared to the other make an impact on your success on the GMAT. So when you think about the key architectures of learning that exist today, there are two fundamental architectures. One is the book-based architecture, and the second is a private tutoring-based architecture. When you think about all the major test prep companies today that provide online offerings, what you're going to find is that even though they provide audio-visual based courses, even though they provide exercises, the key architecture that they provide is still a book-based architecture, or the key architecture of learning that the courses are built on is still that book-based architecture. When you compare e-GMAT against these two architectures, what you're going to find is that e-GMAT's aligned a lot more closely with a private tutoring-based architecture than a book-based architecture. So let's see why we say that is the case and why a private tutoring-based architecture leads to much higher success rate than a book-based architecture. So let's see, how do you get to a score of 720? So if you want to get to a score of 720 or higher, then the first thing that you need to do is you need to create a path towards your goal. So depending on your current strengths and weaknesses, you need to create a study plan that utilizes your strengths and make sure that you spend enough time on overcoming relevant aspects of your weakness. Then you need to learn the concepts that you don't know today. You also need to brush up on concepts where you're rusty. Now, just knowing the concepts isn't important. You need to know how to apply these concepts as well. And then you need to get so good at applying those concepts that you are among those top 6 percentile or top 4 or top 1 percentile of students. So let's see how both these approaches, the book-based and the private tutoring-based approach, tackle these challenges, starting with creating that unique path to the goal. A book-based approach is all about autonomy. So when you study using books, what you get is you get a couple of study plans, and you have to choose one of those study plans uh, based on what you think is right for you. The key point over here is that neither one of these plans is actually personalized to your own strengths and weaknesses. So you pick up a plan and you start studying, and then you start learning concepts. Now there are some excellent books out there that will teach you concepts really well. The one problem that students face is that they have to decide whether they've learned the concept well enough. So that burden of validation lies with the student. Now, when you learn a bunch of concepts, you then try to see whether you can solve questions using those concepts or not. And that's one area where, given the static nature of the book, they don't do as great a job. It becomes really difficult for a book to tell you, hey, how do you approach a problem? What do you do in step 1, step 2, and step 3? Or point out mistakes when you try and solve that problem yourself, as to saying that, where did you make that mistake? So as a result, a lot of people who study using books solve hundreds and hundreds of questions to master application. And while some do master application, many don't. Then the last piece is to really see whether you are among those top 6 or top 4 percentile of students or not. And to do that, a lot of people who study using books, they take tens of mock tests. And then again, a mock test does give you a score, but that onus of evaluating a mock test to really see which are the areas that you should focus on to be able to move to that next level is completely with the student. A private tutoring-based architecture works very differently. When you work with a good private tutor, the first thing that a good private tutor would do is to create a comprehensive study plan that is personalized to your strengths and weaknesses. So the private tutor would evaluate you and tell you, hey, these are the areas that you're good in, and this is the ability score that you should aim for these areas. These are the areas where you need more work, and this is the amount of time you should devote on it. And by doing that personalization, what a private tutor ensures is that for the time that you're going to put in studying, you get the highest score improvement. Then you learn concepts, and as a private tutor teaches you concepts, he gives you feedback on the areas that you haven't learned as well. After teaching concepts, a private tutor teaches you how to apply those concepts, telling you what do you do in step 1, what do you do in step 2, and so on and so forth. And while doing that, a private tutor will give you feedback on your ability to apply. So as you solve more questions, you get better. And as you solve more questions, the private tutor also evaluates whether you have learned the concepts enough to be among those top 6 percentile of students or not. And as you get there, a private tutor then takes you from one topic to the other. So what are the key differences between these two approaches? Why do you learn the exact same content in these two approaches? The extent of personalization, the extent and frequency of feedback, and is very different in a private tutor-based approach. And there's no surprise to see why that approach is a lot more successful. Now let's see, why do we say that most of the other courses are built around this book-based architecture, whereas EGMAT's based on this private tutoring-based approach. And again, the example that we're going to really see is a very similar example as to how someone would go from a score of 600 to a 720. 600 seems to be a very popular scoring starting point within this segment. Now, the first step you need to do, as we talked about, is to create a study plan. And to make sure that each one of you can create a personalized study plan, we built an AI-driven tool called GMAT Planner. It's a utility that has 3 neural networks in it, plus a couple of rule-based engines that allows everyone to build their personalized study plan. Let's see how this works. It first takes your current quant and verbal scores. Now, when you put in that your current scores, it understands those scores. So when you really say, hey, my current quant score is Q50 or Q44, whereas my current verbal score is V28. It understands that a Q44 student, even though that score is 50 percentile, it knows a lot more than a V28 student does in verbal, and hence it is able to come to that decision that most likely the student's strength is quant rather than verbal. So accordingly, while suggesting target scores for to reach a 720, it first improves your quant to a Q50 and then takes your verbal high enough so that you get to a 720 score. Now, it's an excellent recommendation given the starting point, but if you don't like this, you can always change that as well. And as you change that, it automatically adjusts, as you change the quant score, it automatically adjusts the verbal score so that you always get to that 720 score. So now that you have a target quant and a target verbal score, you still need to figure out how would you get to that Q50 or a V30, because you don't study quant or verbal, you study number properties, you study word problems, you study sentence correction. And it then breaks down that Q50 and V30 into your arithmetic and algebra geometry abilities, and on the verbal side, the corresponding abilities. Now, this is one combination of abilities that can lead to the target quant and target verbal scores, and it gives you the flexibility to decide which combination is best for you. And again, given your starting abilities, it can provide really excellent recommendations as well. So when you have those starting and ending abilities, then your GMAT preparation becomes something like this, where you are going from a starting ability of 59 percentile in arithmetic to an 83rd percentile in arithmetic, and a 39 percentile in algebra to an 83rd percentile in algebra. And correspondingly on the verbal side, you have those starting and ending abilities as well. Now, given those data points, what it then does is it tells you how much time should you spend to achieve those abilities, and it takes into account your starting and ending abilities both. So over here, so you can see the starting and ending abilities, or milestones as we call them, outline. And over here, because your starting ability in arithmetic is higher, so you can see the time allocated for that is lower than the time allocated for algebra. So it's 1.4 weeks versus 2.4 weeks for algebra, even though the target milestones are the same over there. So when you do this, your personalized GMAT preparation is no longer a black box in which you're studying. It is a set of neatly defined milestones where you go from a starting ability to an ending ability overall. If you hit these milestones, you can be very certain that you will get to that target GMAT score. The planner doesn't stop there. It also creates a personalized day-by-day study plan where you exactly know what you're going to study on which day. It takes into account how much effort you can put in. It takes into account your starting date, and then gives you an estimate of when you can take the test. Now, why did we spend 1,000 hours building this utility? So that we spend 1,000 hours building this utility so that each one of you can create your personalized study plan in 7 minutes or fewer. So this was about study plans. The next thing that a private tutor does after creating a study plan is to teach you concepts and give, remember, a private tutor, while teaching you concepts, gives you feedback as to how well you've done. The EGMAT course is designed with the same thing in mind. So here what you really see are concepts in video lessons. Every concept has a built-in assessment over there, and based on how you perform in those assessments, we give you feedback. This feedback's personalized to you. These concepts, by the way, are created in a fantastic audio-visual format with really great visuals and animations that provide those visuals at the right time in the right place. Now, when you compare this to another popular course, which is by Magoo, what you're going to find is that there are a bunch of lessons, a couple of lessons on subject verbs. It's not as comprehensive, but other than that, there is no feedback over here. This time that you see is the length of the video, not the time that you actually took watching this video. Then a private tutor teaches you how to apply these concepts, and to do that, he tells you, what do you do in step 1, step 2, and step 3. In the EGMAT course, we've defined an entity called an application file. And in this entity, we teach you how to do that. Now, this is just a subject verb module. This is one of the 20-odd application files that we have in sentence correction. And these application files tell you, they work like a private tutor in which they tell you how do you approach a problem in steps. Once you learn application, we give you practice as well, and then we give you a set of carefully chosen official questions on which you can apply this. And again, you get feedback on how well you're applying. And this feedback is precise, which means if you don't do well, which is the case in this student, with this student, you can go back to the relevant areas of application file, come back and practice those questions again. And this is how every module, we have close to 100 modules in Quant and Verbal, is architected. The beauty of this architecture is if you know you're weak in a certain module, you can come back to that and revise it. If you know you're strong in the same, you can avoid studying that module altogether. When you compare this with a Magoo course, again, what you're going to find is that there is no application file. There is really just one quiz with practice questions. Again, you don't see the score over there because the intent is not to give you feedback, just to give you practice. The last piece is evaluating whether you've learned well enough so that you can move from one topic to the other. And again, why do we need to do that? Because your goal is not to study sentence correction. Your goal is to achieve 90 percentile ability in sentence correction. And to do that, we don't require that you take mock tests. We have something called ability quizzes in this platform called Scholaranium. And so over there, you can take an SC ability quiz and it'll give you an ability score. So in 30 minutes, you can figure out what your, or rather 22 and a half minutes to be precise, you can figure out what your sentence correction ability is. Not only that, it'll tell you that if you've not hit your target, where are you faltering? So in this case, it's very clear that this person needs to focus on comparison. Now, the beauty of this is you can go back to the comparison module, revise certain sections again, come back and take another ability quiz. And so you can do that entire round tripping in about a day or so and go from that 76 percentile to that 90 percentile ability. So you can very clearly see why when we say most of the other courses are based around this book-based approach, whereas e-GMATs built around this private tutoring-based approach. Now, who's built these courses? Who's architected these technology platforms? Some of GMAT Club's top-rated instructors have done that. Instructors who've been reviewed a lot more frequently on GMAT Club. So while only 6% of the people get to that score of 720 or higher, a good percentage of those 6%, they use e-GMAT. Now we are starting our quantum verbal batches next week. You can download those batch calendars over here. So this is how the verbal batch looks like. We'll start with the first session on how to approach GMAT sentence correction. That would be the only session in this batch that would be free of charge. And then we'll move on to, we'll do sentence correction for about 10 days, and we'll move on to critical reasoning, do that for about 10 days as well. And then we'll end with reading comprehension and a proctored mock test. It is designed for working professionals, which means that all sessions take place on weekends, and they take place at 7 a.m. Pacific time, which is 3 p.m. UK, 7:30 p.m. IST. Now, this course comes with a 4-point score improvement guarantee. That's the best guarantee that you're going to find on GMAT Verbal. What it really means is that, let's say your starting score is V30, you've taken an official test and you scored a V30, we guarantee a V34, otherwise we refund your money. Even when your prior highest verbal score is V37, we guarantee a V41, which is 91 percentile, otherwise we refund your money. There's no other course in the world that offers this guarantee. Similarly, this is the verbal side of things. We're going to start with number properties. There'll be 2 sessions on number properties. Then we're going to move word problems, then algebra, then geometry, then PNC probability, and then end with a proctored mock test. Again, it's on weekends itself at 7 a.m. Pacific. The quant course also comes with a pure guarantee of +3 points, which means, let's say you have a Q44, we guarantee a Q47. When you have a Q47, we guarantee a Q50. And again, this is a pure guarantee, which means we don't require that you take the test multiple times, which is what some other prep companies do. With that, I've come to the end of my introduction. If you want to stay updated with all things e-GMAT, or if you want to stay updated with all things going on in the world of GMAT and MBA, you can connect with me through LinkedIn. I have upwards of 10,500 students connected with me on LinkedIn over here. So with that, let's start with the second part of the webinar. I'm going to hide the batch calendar and I'll be happy to share this with you again towards the end. So my goal today in the second part of this webinar is to first of all make sure that each one of you has an idea about what your target quant, what your target verbal scores would be, and should have an idea about how do you allocate time between quant and verbal. Then we'll look at the importance of core skills. Why is it that you need to focus on core skills to get to that 740, 750, 760 odd scores? And how can you improve on these core skills? And lastly, we'll talk about how can you learn effectively through various components of EGMAT course, and how can you track your improvement. So the first and the second part of this webinar are pure strategy. They're agnostic to whether you're using the EGMAT course to study or books or something else. The last part is a bit more specific to components of EGMAT course. But again, the principles over there, if you can find another offering that provides the same kind of tracking, the same kind of feedback, you can use the same principles over there as well. So with that, let's kind of understand a few things over here, and let me ask this question. So we've talked about this word strategy. Okay, tell me, and many of you have heard this word before. You signed up for this webinar, so you understand what strategy is. So tell me, what do you think, according to you, strategy is, and why do we need one? So I'm going to give you about 50 to 60 seconds to write your answers. And what do you think strategy means, and why do we need one? All right, I have about 25 answers. I'm going to give you guys another 15 seconds. All right, 3, 2, and 1. Here are your responses. We have about 40 answers. Take a few seconds to read the responses. So most of the answers are very good. I mean, they tell me that you have a fairly good understanding of what strategy is. Many of you have talked about a plan. Many of you have also talked about getting a direction. Some of you have talked about efficiency. All of those are good reasons for strategy, and a plan is what strategy is as well. So when you think about strategy, a more complete definition is that it's a plan of action which is designed to achieve a particular goal. So when you think about it, there are three things which is there. First of all, a strategy is goal driven. Okay, the second is it's designed, which means the person who's executing the strategy, his or her characteristics go into formulating that strategy. And then it's a plan of action. When you say a plan of action, it's a sequence of steps or a set of milestones that you're going to achieve. So if this is what strategy is, let's talk about what a good strategy is. A good strategy is something that provides maximum benefit with least improvement. And how it does it in the classical senses by first making sure that you capitalize on your strengths, and then you spend enough time and energy to overcome your weakness. I want to emphasize something on these aspects of good strategy. Let me clear this over here. So what does maximum benefit mean in the context of GMAT? Maximum benefit, when we talk about that, means score improvement. Okay, so it's the delta between your current score and what you'd achieve given the amount of time that you put in. Now, least input doesn't mean less input. It means compared to all the other paths to achieve that certain goal, it is a lower amount of input. Least input, if you want to go from a 500 to a 740, would still mean it's about 200 to 200 or 220 odd hours. But uh, the approach with a good strategy would always would mean less time and a higher probability of success than the approach with a strategy which doesn't come under that good aspect. And typically the principle that people who create the strategy is to really say that you need to first make sure that you achieve all the headroom that you have uh, in the areas of your strength, and then you spend enough time and energy to overcome your weakness. Now, there are certain hallmarks of a good strategy. First of all, it's goal driven. We've talked about that. The second thing is a good strategy starts with an analysis of what your situation is as well as your current strengths. Now, let me just ask a yes no question over here. So, how many of you, when you started your GMAT preparation, you went to a friend or someone who you knew had taken the test and really asked that person, hey, how long did it take for you to achieve this a certain score? And when that person said, okay, 2 months or 3 months, and you assume that you're going to take a very similar amount of time to achieve that target score. How many of you did that? Okay, let's get a few more data points. I'm going to remove broadcast as well. So the question really is, how many of you went to a friend, and really more or less adapted, or sorry, adopted, not adapted, adopted his or her strategy, and said, whatever worked for your friend is going to more or less work for you as well. Let's get a few more responses. I have 125 students right now. I only have 56 responses. Okay. All right. We have about 60 responses. Half of you did that. The other half did not. Now, it's really helpful to have someone who's gone through the entire experience of taking the test and done well. So that's really, really great. Make sure you keep your friendship with that person. But taking that person's strategy and really assuming that's going to apply to you is a really bad idea. Why? Because that particular person may live close to the office, and whereas you may not, and the result of that is that he may have a lot of time at hand, whereas you may not. That particular person may not have as demanding a boyfriend or a girlfriend as you guys do, and again, it impacts how much quality time you can put into study. Your relative strengths and weaknesses could be very different, so the amount of time you need to spend on certain areas could be very different as well. So when you take someone's study plan, just make sure you personalize it with your strengths and your situation. And if you don't do that, then just adopting their study plan without adapting it can be disastrous, because when you do that, you may be expecting a certain amount of improvement in a certain time span, and you won't get it. The other piece is a good strategy. You should also have good assumptions in place. Um, there's some people who learn new things very easily, others don't. And each one of you has had about 20 plus years of learning history with you. So yourself. And if you're someone who takes a lot longer to learn new things, take that into account. If you're someone who has what we call as a learning inertia, in the end, it doesn't matter whether uh, you took 2 months to ace the test or you took 5 months. What matters is whether you ace the test or not. No one's going to ask you how long did you study for to get to that 740 score. So know thyself and have good assumptions with regards to how fast can you improve. Once you've analyzed your situation, once you put your strengths in place, then you create a study plan and execute on it. The one thing that I want you to remember is that you have to personalize whatever study plan you get. I mean, even when we give you a study plan, we recommend that you modify that a bit. And And it's something that you need to devise, and it has to have those checks and balances in place to ensure that, if you put in 40 hours, you achieve the improvement that you expected to achieve. If you did not, then you spend some time to really see, hey, what needs to be done to make sure that you are executing on that path properly. With that, I also want to talk about one key term which is really important in the context of GMAT, and that's percentile. What is percentile? It's a relative rank out of a population. So let's kind of look at why that's important. Percentile is one thing that actually appears everywhere on the test, starting from your overall score and what it actually means. So when you get to a certain score, so when you get to a 760, that's 99 percentile, what it really means is if about 250,000 people take the test every year, you are better than 247,500, or you are amongst the top 2,500 students. If you score 700, which means you get 88 percentile, which means that you're better than these many students, or you're amongst the top 30,000 students. When you think about the number of seats in the top 15 odd B school, that's about 10,000 seats or so. And that's why if you are in that 740 to 760 bracket, you're a very precious commodity for these schools. There's another term which is very common in the context of GMAT preparation, which is accuracy. Now, accuracy is what if you take a 10-question quiz and you answer 8 out of those 10 correctly, it's 80% accuracy, which means it's the percentage of questions that you answered correctly. Your accuracy has no context of the difficulty level or rank overall. You may take a quiz and you may have 80% accuracy. Your percentile could still be 50 percentile. What is ability? Ability, when put in a certain context, is nothing but your percentile in that context, more or less. So again, remember the terms. What is percentile? It's a relative rank. What is accuracy? It's a percentage. It doesn't have any ranking in context. And ability is very similar to percentile. It has a relative rank when put in context. Because you're going to use these terms frequently on the GMAT. Now, on the GMAT, what the GMAT really tests is your relative rank or your percentile or your ability. They're just very interchangeable terms. So before you start even preparing, as you're creating your study plan, you need to define your target quant and your target verbal split. And to do that for a group as a whole, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually divide this group into 3 different segments. One is what we call as someone who's a quant whiz, means that you're very strong in quant. The second is someone who may not be a quant whiz, but still is considers quant to be his or her strength. And then the third segment is those who are not strong in quant. Now, if you're strong in verbal and strong in quant, you can put yourself in any of the first two groups over here. And let me point the 2 groups, any of these 2 groups. If you're someone who's strong in verbal but not strong in quant, you should put yourself in this group. Now, this is how do you get to a 700? The reason why I talk about this is because a lot of people I saw them asking, I'm at a 550, I want to get to a 760. How do I go about doing that? I'm at a 500, I want to go to a 740. How do I get about doing that? The first thing is divide your journey into milestones. Then 700 is one logical milestone that I ask people to hit first before you go from that 700 to that 740, 760, 770 score. So if you are a quant whiz, the thing that you should really do, first of all, is to make sure that you maximize your quant score, or you hit a Q50 or a Q51. Correspondingly, to get to a 700, you only need a V33, V34, which means you shouldn't even start studying verbal if you are a quant whiz, by the way, only for that guy, till you hit a Q49. If you're someone who's strong in quant, again, your target quant score should be Q48, Q49. And some of you may be thinking, 49, 50 doesn't seem to be a huge difference, but it is. That's kind of how the scoring on the GMAT works. A lot of people get to Q49, very few of them get to Q50, even fewer get to Q51, which means that you need to score slightly higher on the verbal side of things to get to a 700 or so. But again, over here, if you're strong in quant, ensure that you at least have a Q47 before you start studying verbal. If you're someone who's not strong in quant, make verbal your strength. For those folks who are not strong in quant, improving on verbal is a lot more efficient than improving on quant, just because of how confined the syllabus on the verbal side of things is. But again, what you see as a principle that's taken over here is that you need to capitalize on your strengths first before focusing on your weakness. Now, once you get to that 700, if you want to get to that 760, even if you are this quant whiz over here, you'd have to focus on verbal because there's no headroom in quant left. But get to that 700 first. You'd be a lot more confident with regards to getting to a 750 once you hit that 700 mark. Some of you may be asking, why is it important that your strategy is quant driven or verbal driven? After all, you've got to study both the sections. So why is it important to have a target quant and a target verbal score in mind? Even though in the end you have to study both quant and verbal. Why do you think? All right, let's see a few more responses. Capitalize, narrow focus. Okay, play on my strength. Okay. All right, so you have some really good answers. To save time and to be efficient, that's one thing which is there. But and that's something which is really important. But another reason why it's important is to ensure that to maximize your probability of success. Now remember this, I said earlier, only 6% of the people get to that score of 720 or higher. A lot of people who don't get to the score of 720 also put in a lot of hard work. But the reason why they may not improve to a score of 720 or higher is because then that hard work isn't going in the right direction. Someone asked me earlier, I saw a question pop up in the Q&A part to really say, again, I'm currently at a V21. Now I want to get to a 750. Should I aim for a V45 or a V40 and essentially a Q51? And again, for someone who's at a V21 to begin with, to aim for a V45, which is 99 percentile, is a fairly lofty goal. A much better way to get to a 750 score is if you aim for a Q40 or a V40 or a V41 and then improve your quant accordingly, especially if your relative strength is quant versus verbal. So aiming for the right things is really important, because when you're aiming for a V45, if you're at a V21 right now, what you're really saying is, I'm going to be better than 95% of the native test takers, which is a slightly difficult thing to do. But if you want to be amongst the top 10 percentile of test takers worldwide on GMAT verbal, that's a lot easier to do for that particular person whose relative strength is quant. So aiming for the right things is really important. It improves your chances of success. The second thing is it also improves your efficiency with regards to how fast you get to that score improvement. One other piece which is really important is confidence. So if quant's your strength, if you study first quant and then you're midway studying verbal, and some people like to take mock tests, despite how much I discourage them. And then you take a mock test, because you will have already improved on quant, it's very likely that your score on the quant side of the test would be a lot higher, and on the verbal side it'd be okay. So you'd still get to a I'm sorry about that. So you'd still get to a 670, 680, and then if you're aiming for a 740, 730 or so, that improvement from a 670, 680 to 730 would seem a lot easier than it would be if you scored a 610, 620, especially if you've put in considerable amount of time. So efficiency, probability of success, and that confidence and positive feedback, Those are three reasons why I would make sure that I get my strategy right. How can each one of you create your own strategy? Use GMAT Planner. When you use GMAT Planner, it'll give you your personalized quant and your personalized verbal scores, and based on where you currently are, and it'll give you a milestone-driven study plan with the amount of time that you need to spend in each subsection. So a lot of people really think that, okay, I'm gonna get a decent score, but the impact of GMAT score beyond a certain point is minimal. I mean, a 720 is as good as a 740 or a 750, and beyond. And people have this opinion, and I see that written on forums as well, that hey, if you have a 720, uh, don't worry about getting a higher GMAT score, or if you have a 700, focus just on your application. And I want to talk about certain stats over here, which will tell you the role that GMAT score plays and the role that other things play with regards to your application. Okay, the first thing is this article, which is about a 5-year-old article, but it's very relevant even today. And with this, actually, it's way more relevant today than it was 5 years ago. This article is titled is that on B school test, Americans failed to measure up. It was written in Wall Street Journal by one of their most famous correspondents. And then some supporting data is also available on Poets and Quants overall. What this article really said is that high GMAT scores from folks from India and China have caused a problem for B school admission officers, and that has led them to ask the GMAC to provide separate rankings for Americans, separate rankings for Chinese, and separate rankings for Indians. And why did they do that? Let's kind of really understand this. To address those concerns, the concerns are that Caucasians do not score high, or Americans in general do not score as high on the GMAT as they used to because of increased competition from Asians. GMAT in September, which is September of 2014, introduced a benchmarking tool that allows admission officers to compare applicants against their own cohort, filtering scores and percentile rankings by world, region, country, gender, and college GPA. So an admission officer can really figure out how you stand against, if you're someone from China or India or South Korea. How do you compare to other South Koreans? How do you compare to other Indians? How do you compare to other Chinese? Or how, as an Indian, you compare to a certain Chinese guy who has a certain GPA as well? Sarah Nair, who is the assistant dean of MBA admissions at Darden, said that she was among those who contacted GMAC for help. And let's see, why did she contact GMAC for help? She said, I need to be able to show my scholarship committee, which includes faculty, that this person is in the top 5 percentile of test takers in his region, even though that individual might not rank highly against test takers worldwide. So, a few things over here. GMAC's actually really important at top B schools. I mean, your relative score beyond 720 becomes super important at top B schools. And the other thing is that you now compete against others in your region. And the reason why it's really important to understand is, it used to happen. If you were an Asian, you'd get really good score in quant, and you'd get slightly above average scores in verbal, and you'd get to a 710, 720, and you would rank really highly worldwide, which still is the case to a certain degree. But the problem is, even though you may be in the 95th percentile worldwide, when compared to Indians, you probably could be in the 86th percentile, and that starts to pose a problem, which means that you now need to do well in both quant and verbal, or the bar's been raised higher for you. The other piece, which all of us knew and was accepted or was formally disclosed for the first time by B schools, was that the role that your GMAT score plays when it comes to scholarships. Here's another data point that was compiled by moderators on GMAT Club as to the chances, how the chances of admission to B schools improve as you get to a 750 or higher score. And you can really see this data was compiled based on information provided by 3,000 students. And you can see at Kellogg, the probability of admission goes from or statistical chances of admission go from a 4% or so when you're 690 or lower to 42% when you're 760 or higher. Darden, you can really see the preference for GMAT scores over there. Now, I'm also a member of AGAC, which is an Association of Graduate Admissions Council. It's a society where we talk about ethical practices with regards to B school admissions and taking the GMAT. We also work very closely with admission directors at various B schools. So there's a conference which happens in May or June every year. This year it's happening on 6th of May. Where we'd get together at a certain business school, and all the admission directors from top B schools would come there, and we'll talk about the trends in admission. We'll talk about H-1B visa issues. We'll talk about, hey, how are they using the GMAT? What other things are they using to figure out the right students for their particular school? So certain things with regards to GMAT from there. Most students, so a lot of people really worry about multiple scores showing up on their profile if they didn't cancel their scores. And schools really don't care, frankly. In fact, if you have a 600 on your score report and then you have a 720, they consider it to be an excellent character trait. They really say, I mean, folks from Columbia, folks from a couple of other B schools really told me, it tells us that this particular student really wants to study at a top B school and is willing to put in the hard yards for that. Now, if you're waitlisted, some of you may have applied last year, and if you're waitlisted, what admission officers say is, if you're waitlisted, focus on improving your GMAT score. Why? Because a few folks said to the extent, so what else can you do in 4 months to make us change your mind? If you want to apply to a Wharton or a GSB Chicago or a Stern or a Columbia or a Harvard or a Stanford, make sure you get at least Q46. Why? Because otherwise they'll worry about your ability to take on the coursework. A few schools would not even look at your application if you don't have a certain GMAT score, if you belong to a competitive pool. And again, if you approach those schools, many of them will tell you right away. They don't publish it, but they will tell you and say, this is my background, this is my GMAT score. Do you think I'm competitive for your school? And these schools will tell you right off the bat, you'd be competitive if you get a score of 750 or higher, given your background. Otherwise, you won't be competitive, regardless of if you have that background, regardless of the quality of experience in that. And I asked those schools and said, why do you do that? It's not every school, it's only a few schools. And I asked them, why do you do that? He said, because we get just so many quality applications from folks with that profile. So we can choose to be selective. And then schools have confirmed that GMAT scores have huge bearing. In fact, on scholarship. So statistically, in the class 2018, 61% of all students who went to top B schools in the class of 2018, or the class that started in 2018, received scholarships. The amount of scholarship varied based on two things. One is the GMAT score of students, and the second is how they performed in the interview. So when you think about what has an impact on scholarships, it's your GMAT score and it's your interview. So what kind of people participate in these conferences? So when it comes to B schools, pretty much any top B school that you can think of is there. And when it comes to test prep industry, top folks in the test prep and admission consulting space are there. So you have the Linda Abrahams, the Stacy Blackman, folks from Veritas Prep, EGMATs there as well. You also have the GMAC over there. GMAC actually this year is the gold sponsor for this conference. And you'd have people such as Prodigy Finance who would sponsor your education post your admissions or so. Now, this was some anecdotal, some statistical data. I'm going to also give you certain anecdotal cases of people who've benefited a lot from high GMAT scores. So one of these guys is Victor Makula, who scored a 770 with a Q50 and a V44. This guy received a full fellowship from Ross, a full fellowship from Keenan Flagler, and he also received an admit from Wharton. He's actually studying at Wharton right now. he wanted to ace GMAT verbal. He took the GMAT 4 times. He got to a V44, which is 98th percentile on verbal. Um, he used two online resources. One was EGMAT for GMAT preparation and Applicant Lab for his B school application. And the reason he was able to get improved to 98th percentile on verbal is because he's used analytics to figure out what his weakness was and then improve on that. Overall, this guy spent about $600 or 598 to be precise on his GMAT preparation plus MBA application. Received upwards of 200 grand in fellowships. Then you have this guy who's Kongbo. You received not one but four full fellowships from various B schools. Now the beauty of this is when you get the PDF, you can watch this interview. What you're going to find is that this guy has a fairly average profile. He doesn't speak perfect English, yet he was able to get to a 760 with a V44. Now this guy is studying at Ohio Fisher. He's not just he hasn't just received a full fellowship, but he also has a study assistantship, which means he gets paid $1,700 per month to study there. I mean, talk about getting a B school degree and a salary, or a mini salary overall. He doesn't have any extracurriculars, and his English isn't perfect, and yet he was able to get to that 760 was because he just focused on doing things right. He kept things really simple. He said, "This is what I'm going to aim for. I'm going to put my head down, do the effort, and get there." And by doing that, he aced the GMAT. Then he did the same thing with his interviews. He aced the interview as well, and yeah, and rest is history. This is another case for Pravi. Pravi is a businesswoman. She basically wanted to study at Kellogg or Wharton, and she took the GMAT 4 times. Her target GMAT score was 680, or 5 times. I'm sorry. She joined EGMAT during her fifth attempt. She improved to a 740. She received multiple scholarships, including an 80,000 scholarship from Georgetown. She's currently studying at Kellogg overall. And this last case is of a student who's received admits from every business school that she applied to. Mansi's case is really unique, where she received admits from Harvard, Stanford, Kellogg, Wharton, and INSEAD. Now, she's written a debrief in which she talks about how to create a study plan. It's very similar to what you see in this webinar. And then here is a quote from her. It says, "I firmly believe that you should have your own customized strategy as per your needs. While you can learn from other strategy, you should make your own. And over the course of your preparation, you'll be flexible enough to adapt." Now, the beauty of this is when you click on this link over here, what you're going to really see is that she has the strategy mapped out. And then she also has changed that strategy as she, evaluated herself along various steps. Mansi is also was also a student of one of our partners, Maestro Review, who helped her in getting to these top business schools, and she has allowed us to publish Maestro Review. Poonam from Maestro Review has allowed us to publish Mansi's interview, so you can really see not only how she approached the GMAT preparation, but also how she approached her MBA application to get into these top B schools. So let's understand how do you ace the GMAT. But before that, let's summarize what are the benefits of a high GMAT score. The first benefit is admission to the school of your choice. If you're aiming for an MIT, if you're aiming for a Harvard, if you're aiming for a GSP Chicago or a Tuck, and you get into that school, just the enthusiasm, the surety of a future career has easily a financial benefit of $500,000 over a 10-year period. When it comes to scholarships, this is priceless in the sense that, hey, you can, going to a business school where you don't have to pay anything, or you have to pay a relatively lower amount compared to other students. That just lowers the burden tremendously. When I went for my MBA, I had a full fellowship from 3 different business schools, and And just going in there knowing that I have that helped me a lot. When I graduated, I actually did 4 internships during my second year, so I made quite a bit of money during my second year. So when I graduated, within 3 months, I bought my first house, whereas most of my colleagues or classmates were thinking about, okay, starting to pay off their B school debt. So it was a very different feeling, by the way. If you want to go into strategy, if you want to go into corporate marketing, if you want to go into consulting, the person who'd be interviewing you most likely will have a high GMAT score. And if you have a similar GMAT score on your resume, that sense of respect that that person will have for you, that's priceless. And for those of you who want to have a backup career, again, as a GMAT instructor, it's a very high, very well-paying job. It's not for everyone, but for those of you who want to have a backup career, that's a really good option as well. So overall, a high GMAT score, super high return on investment. It gives you confidence wherever you go. And then even though it's valid for just 5 years, it stays with you forever. If I were to put my resume out today, I'd still have my GMAT score on it. So let's understand, how do you ace the GMAT overall? And to that way, I'm going to focus back on these two terms that we talked about, accuracy versus ability. Remember, accuracy, when you take a quiz, it's a percentage of questions that you answer correctly, and then there's no ranking in there. So the difficulty level aspect is completely lost. And ability is nothing but a comparative performance in a particular section. So let's see how a computer adaptive test works. And to do that, we're going to simulate the attempts of two students, the one on top and one at bottom. Now, this is designed to teach you the principles of a computer adaptive test. The GMAT uses these principles in a slightly different manner, but more or less it uses these principles. So let's look at two students. So y-axis is the difficulty level of questions, x-axis is the question number, and we're going to focus just on the first 5 questions. So let's talk about student 1, or as it's called case 1 here. Student 1 gets the question. The first question is always around that median difficulty level. Student 1 gets that right. Then he gets the second question, which is of a slightly higher difficulty level. He gets that right as well. Then he gets the third question, which is of an even higher difficulty level. How do we know that? If you draw, you can really see that we are going higher on the y-axis as we go from first to second to third question. He gets that wrong. Then he gets the fourth question, which is of a difficulty level between third and second. To do that, you can draw horizontal lines from question number 3 and question number 2, and you will see the fourth question is between those horizontal lines. So I'm going to just remove that. He gets that right, gets the fifth question, slightly higher difficulty level, gets that wrong. Then he goes to the bottom. Let's look at student 2. Student 2 gets the first question, similar difficulty level or medium difficulty level, gets that wrong. Gets the second question, which is a lot easier, gets that right. Gets the third question, which is slightly more difficult, gets that wrong. Gets the fourth question, which is relatively easier, gets that right, and gets the fifth question right as well. Now, at the end of question number 5, if I were to end the test, who do you think would be doing better and why? At the end of question number 5, who do you think would be doing better and why? Case 1, yes, pretty much everyone says case 1. That's good that everyone's saying case 1. Now my question really is, why is case 1 or student 1 doing better, even though both of them have answered 3 out of 5 questions correctly? As many of you have said, that the difficulty level of questions that he answered, that student 1 answered, was much higher, so he has to be doing a lot better. And that is absolutely correct. If you look at it, even though both of them have answered 3 out of 5 questions correctly, so their accuracy is 60%, student 1 received 5 questions. Each one of those questions was either at the average difficulty level or above the average difficulty level. Student 2 received only one question, the first question, which was at the average difficulty level. Every other question was below the average difficulty level, or the median difficulty level, as we call it on the GMAT. Now tell me one thing. Why did student 2 not receive difficult questions? Why did student 2 not receive difficult questions? Okay, because he answered the first one wrong. All right, good. So you understand that it's an adaptive test, and so if you make mistakes on medium difficulty questions, you're going to get easier questions, and that's how an adaptive test works. So in a sense, on the test, you have this thing which we call as the question picker, which the role of that question picker is to determine what's the most difficult question that you can answer correctly, and it calibrates itself frequently during the test. If you make mistakes on medium difficulty question, it will serve easier questions to you. If you solve questions correctly, it will serve more challenging questions to you. So in a sense, what this question picker is trying to do is it's trying to hit what we call as a local maxima of your accuracy. Why? Because by reducing the difficult questions, by difficulty level of question, it's trying to increase your accuracy. Can you see that? This question picker is trying to really make sure that you really answer questions correctly. A short answer part, I'm sorry. Yes or no? By reducing that difficulty level over here, right? So because the question picker on the GMAT tries to do that, comparing accuracy between two attempts, comparing accuracy between two students, it becomes a really futile exercise on the test. And that's something that I want you to remember. Why? Because a lot of us, what we do is we take the test and really say, okay, out of 36 questions in verbal, how many did I get right? Out of 31 in quant, how many did I get right? But that's not how the GMAT works. Okay, what the GMAT looks for is the ability, and that's what you need to focus on. So if you want to ace the GMAT, you've got two challenges. One is to make sure that the test throws difficult questions at you, and then you need to make sure that you answer them correctly. Now, this was in principle how things work. Now, this is some real data. This is, for those of you who remember, GMAT before middle of 2018 used to be a 41 and 36 question test on quant versus verbal. So this is data from the year 2017 when the verbal section was still 41 questions. Now, what you see over here are two students who practically, it's very difficult to differentiate between them once you go from question number 11 to 31. The only difference between these two students is the first two questions, where this guy made two mistakes over here, whereas student number 1 had made 0 mistakes in the first 10 questions. Now let's look at the scores that they received. Student 2 got a score of V32, which is 65 percentile. Student 1 got a V43, which is 97 percentile. Now, for those of you who are focused on accuracy, a lot of you may be thinking, okay, this is really harsh. A difference of 2 questions and a difference in rank of 80,000 students. How many of you are thinking that? That, hey, this seems like really, really harsh. I make 2 mistakes and my rank goes back 80,000 students. And what's interesting is that that no one thinks that I can still score a 97th percentile despite making 9 mistakes. Right? If the student once made 9 mistakes, yet has a 97th percentile. No one thinks that. But what people really worry about is that, okay, the guy who made 11 mistakes got 65th percentile. And when you see such data, you threw away your understanding of how an adaptive test works and why accuracy is not as great a predictor. And let's kind of understand this. Because accuracy is a really poor predictor of the performance on a computer adaptive test. I'm going to focus on student 2, the guy who got the first 2 questions wrong. Remember, the first question, median difficulty level, he got that wrong. In the second question, 30 percentile level, he got that wrong as well. So tell me, what is the probability that if you are a 90 percentile guy and you would get a 50 percentile question wrong and a 30 percentile question wrong, one after the other? Remember that those probabilities follow a bell curve. What is the probability of these two events to happen one after the other, or what we call as a joint probability? It's very unlikely. It actually is lower than 1 in 10,000. It's not less than 0.2, it's lower than 1 in 10,000. Less than 0.2 is a 90 percentile guy getting a 50 percentile question wrong. That probability is essentially about 5%. Okay. So at this point, the test is not very wrong to think that this guy, this student number 2, is not a very smart guy. So the third question that he gets is of a 15 percentile level. He gets that right. Then the next question that he gets, 25 percentile level, he gets that right. 35 gets that right. 40, 45 gets that right. 60, 80, and so it takes him another 4 or 5 questions before he starts getting 80 to 90 percentile questions. Student 1, on the other hand, by the time he's reached question number 4, is getting 90 percentile questions because he's gotten everything right. And then he continues to perform at that level. Now remember, a 90 percentile question has 3 times as many points as a 20 or 30 percentile question. So the gulf between them with regards to the weighted points that the test uses to score itself internally is increasing as every question is served, even though their accuracies don't show that gulf. And I'm going to really show you how the test measures them in a bit. But the real reason, and you shouldn't be worried, over here with regards to the fact that, okay, it's just a difference of 2 questions. What you need to worry about is that this test is a test of your ability. It will narrow down to your ability. So a silly mistake in the first 2 can screw things up. So first of all, if you're a 90 percentile guy, don't make a silly mistake. Otherwise, you can't call yourself a 90 percentile guy. But it doesn't mean that if you make a silly mistake, it'll screw things up. It'll slightly screw things up. But this guy did not have the ability overall to the same extent, because he continued to make mistakes as questions became more difficult as well. And so he can make a silly mistake in the first question. He can still recover. That's not a problem. But so don't pressurize yourself a whole lot. But make sure you understand that this is a test that measures ability. Is it possible that the first 2 questions are V45? No, very unlikely. I mean, I have not seen that. Okay, the first 2 questions, median difficulty level. The test is trying to evaluate you. So another takeaway that a lot of people really think over here with this is, hey, the first 10 questions are super important, so I'm going to spend a lot of time on getting the first 10 questions right. And they rarely, I've seen people spend about 30% of all the time that they have in the first 10 or the first 8 questions. And that essentially hurts them way more than it helps them. Why? Because it does 2 things. These people who spend 30% of the time in the first 8 questions, they really are making a very fatal assumption. What they're assuming is that by spending more time on a particular question, more than required time, they increase the probability of getting that question right, which on the GMAT it doesn't work. You either know a question or you don't know. I mean, you either have the ability to answer a question correctly or you don't have the ability. By spending more time on a particular question, you cannot manufacture ability. That doesn't work. Okay. And then the second thing is, if you spend so much time on the first 9 questions, you have less time remaining to finish the test. It impacts your performance throughout the test. Now, the first example was general principle. This was GMAT prep data. Here is some real data of a guy who improved from a V17 to a V40. And the reason why I'm sharing this one with you is A, because it's actual attempt, and B, you can really see how someone's gone from such a low score to a V17 is 17 percentile to a 91st percentile overall. The nice thing is this guy provides his enhanced score report. So each one of you can go to the link, download the enhanced score report. And as you do that, what you're going to find is that this guy, it's not a flawless performance. He made a lot of mistakes, but he did really well in the first 2 segments. So he proved to the test that he has the ability so that the test serves difficult questions to him. So he used a strategy which we call as a build, improve, or maintain strategy, where he built he demonstrated to the test that he has high ability. So by the end of second block, the test was serving difficult questions, and then he still solved half the questions correctly to make sure that the test did maintain the difficulty level of questions that were being served to him. And again, you can go to this link and figure that out as to download this ESR. So do you guys remember these guys? 2 students, the difference being 2 questions in the first 2 questions. Do you guys remember them? Okay. And when you looked at them, you looked at them through a lens of accuracy. That's not how the GMAT looks at them. This is how the GMAT looks at them. The V43rd guy, according to the GMAT, had a 95th percentile rank in sentence correction, 95th percentile rank in critical reasoning, and 87th percentile rank in reading comprehension. The corresponding ranks for a V32 guy were a lot lower. And when you look at these students through that lens of ability, how do these students look? Do they look a lot more different now? Yes, they're very different. And that's how the GMAT looks at them. It's not through that lens of accuracy. When you add the difficulty level of questions that were being served to these guys, even though they made very similar number of mistakes because of the difficulty level, you're going to really see that. So acing the GMAT is all about ability. A lot of people worry about timing and exam strategy, choosing which questions to attempt and all of that stuff. They are important, but not as important as other things. And I want to make sure that a lot of you understand that, because many of you who've come over here, you've come from a background where you've looked at and studied for non-adaptive tests. How many of you know of an Indian test called the CAT, which is the Indian equivalent of the GMAT? How many of you have heard of or know of that? Okay, so for those of you who don't know about this test, it's an Indian equivalent of the GMAT. It's a test which is used for Indian B schools. It's a very popular test, but 200,000 people take this test. And a lot of people who come from that CAT background, they really think that, hey, the way to prepare for GMAT is very similar to very similar to how they prepared for CAT. And CAT is common admissions test, not computer adaptive tests. And when they apply the same approaches to preparing for the GMAT, they falter, and there's a reason why this happens. So we'll talk about what's important to non-adaptive test versus how is it different from the GMAT. So on the CAT, you have various sections, very similar to the way you have on the GMAT, and in each of those sections, you get a bunch of questions to solve. Now, no one or very few people can solve all the questions. Many people can only get to a proportion of those questions. So each of these questions in a particular section have the same number of marks. But when you get those questions, what really happens is there are certain questions which are easy, certain questions that are medium difficulty level, and certain questions that are hard. So the key to acing the CAT, which is the Indian exam, is selecting the right question. To ace the CAT, you need to first make sure that you're able to figure out which question is the easiest, solve it first, then the next easy question, and so on and so forth. So that question selection becomes really, really important. On a computer adaptive test such as the GMAT, you're not given that choice. The key thing is to be able to answer questions that are served to you, and then as the difficulty level goes up, continue to answer questions correctly. On a non-adaptive test such as the CAT, every question carries the same marks. Okay, so the way to ace the test is to solve as many questions as possible. On a computer adaptive test, you have difficult questions carry 3 times as many marks, and because of this, accuracy is not as relevant. Okay, a lot of people who prepare for the CAT, they really say, hey, I've got to improve on my ability to spot which question is easy and so on and so forth. So they do a lot of practice. They take 15 plus marks, and essentially their goal is to perfect that test taking strategy. On the GMAT, that's not useful. Why? Because it's a test of ability. So you only need marks to build up stamina, and most people who practice the right way need about 4 to 5 marks. Now, am I correct? Isn't that how you study for CAT? You take as many marks, you focus on spotting the easier questions. So essentially, the Indian equivalent is a test of your test taking skill. It's not a test of your ability. That's why the CAT is not a great predictor of how you perform in a business school. The GMAT is the test of your ability. And that's why it's a really good predictor of how you perform in business school, as well as in your post MBA careers. So the way you prepare for the GMAT has to be very different from the way you prepare for CAT. Now, we've talked about GMAT, we've talked about ability. So one of the questions which is there is, how the hell do you measure ability? There are 2 ways to measure ability. One is to take a mock test. But if you're an e-GMAT student, the way you do that is by taking ability quizzes in quant and verbal. And in Scholarinium, we have this platform called Scholarinium, which allows you up to 30 verbal ability quizzes and up to 40 quant or ability quizzes. Not only that, it tells you which are the areas you need to focus next on. So if you have a low ability, it will tell you where to focus. And if you focus on those areas, you can take another ability quiz and you can see your improvement. Here's an example of a student who basically wanted to aim for Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, but her quant score was stuck at Q35. She was pretty good in verbal. She had a Q V36 to begin with, but she realized to get to a 740 plus score, she needed to improve on verbal further. So she started using our GMAT online course. She improved from Q35 to Q47 even before she starts Scholaranium, and then she used Scholaranium to go from a Q47 to a Q50. It's because of Scholaranium's ability to provide you with these insights, but it's because of the quality of questions that it provides. It's rated higher than GMAT prep mock tests on GMAT Club. In fact, even rated higher than GMAT Club tests. So someone asks, why is CAT given so much importance in India if that's the case? Because it's the IIMs who conduct the CAT, and they won't let the GMAT be used for their full-time MBA program. That's why it is. So what have we talked about so far? We've talked about strategy in the context of GMAT. We've talked about GMAT Planner and how you can use it to create your own study plan. We've talked about why GMAT's important when it comes to admission, not just admissions, but also scholarships, and the value of GMAT. And then we've talked about the relationship between GMAT and ability and how you can personalize your GMAT plan by looking at data. We'll next talk about how do you learn properly, and then how do you track your improvement as you're learning. Okay, let's talk about core skills and what's the importance of core skills when it comes to learning properly. And to do that, I'm going to make you solve a few questions. The first one is a word problems question. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to get to the answer. Here's the question. Take 2 minutes. Right, guys, get those answers in. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll, broadcast the results. I see about 65% of you answered this correctly. That is really great. Let me ask this other question. Okay, where is my poll question? Sorry. Yes, here's my poll question. Great. The next question is, how did you solve this question? And the 3 answer choices which are there are by making equations, using number substitution, or by using a formula. Let's get a few more responses. How did you solve this question? All right. 3, 2, and 1. But 85% of you used solve this question by making equations. Now, mathematically, I can prove to you that number substitutions are a slightly more efficient way than making equations. But the reason why a lot of us solve this question by making equations is because our brains wire to do it this way. The moment we see a number properties, a word problem question, and the way we see, hey, Jacob's not 12 years younger than Michelle, Essentially, our brain forms these equations which says, hey, m is equal to j plus 12. Uh, and that's something that our brain's wired. Now, on the verbal section, do you think our brain's wired to do the same thing on the verbal section? The moment you see a question in verbal, your brain automatically starts to solve it, knows what you need to do in step 1, what you need to do in step 2, step 3, and so forth. No, it isn't. And that's why, for the verbal side of things, we do need to create the processes so that our brain does exactly the same. When you do that, that's when your ability in verbal becomes as good as it is in quant. Okay, here's the solution to the question. You can really say today, Jacob is 12 years younger than Michelle, so you write the first equation, which is m is equal to j plus 12. Then you really say what's going to happen 9 years from now, and then you solve these questions. So there's this person who thinks that we need to think differently to solve verbal questions than in quant. Let's hold that thought, and I'm going to prove to you that that's not the case. And to do that, let's understand what are the core skills required to solve a question such as this one. Can you write down the core skills required to solve this question? Okay, let's get a few more responses overall. So essentially, you think about the core skills required to solve a question such as this one. You need to be able to work with variables. You need to convert statement into equations. You need to relate them and then go about solving those equations. Take a moment to read this and tell me, do you agree that these are the core skills that are required, main skills that are required to solve a question such as this one? Okay, those who are saying no can put that response in the Q&A pod to really say why do you say no. But essentially, most of you really say yes. These are the core skills. Now, tell me, what would happen if and think about the scenario. What would happen if the core skill that you lacked in was skill number 2, which is converting statement into equations, and the core skill that you practiced again and again was skill number 4, which is how to solve equations? What would happen to your ability to answer a question such as this type? You'd still fail, yes. You will not get it right. You won't see any improvement. Essentially, your ability to solve a question such as this one would not improve at all. Now, is there anyone over here who's been studying for some time for the GMAT and has found that no matter how much time they put in, their overall GMAT score doesn't improve? They may seem to be stuck at a 630 or a 650 or so. Is anyone over here? Despite putting in the effort, your score seems stuck. It'll be like trying to push a wall with all your strength. Absolutely, it feels like that, yes. And the reason why this happens is because you're doing the equivalent of the exact same thing, where you're putting your energy on the wrong core skill. And because you're putting your energy on the wrong core skill, you don't see improvement. So first is you need to identify the core skills that you need to improve on. And the second is you need to make sure you understand the hierarchy, because in this case, this guy may not be as good at solving equations, but if he's making the wrong equations, by becoming good at solving equations, his ability in quant will not go up a whole lot. Why? Because if he's solving the wrong thing, he's not going to really improve overall. Now, How many of you think, okay, I understand that this is something that exists in quant, but what about verbal? Some of you have talked about RC. Do such neatly defined core skills exist in verbal as well? And if so, what are those? How many of you are thinking about that? And can verbal be as logical and as methodical as quant? Okay, so the answer to that is yes, they exist, and I'm going to demonstrate that to you. But before we do that, I'm going to really show you something. Okay, I'm going to show you. So the way we learned a lot of quant when we were in school, in the same way, Americans learn a lot of verbal when they are in school. So I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I have a daughter who's 11 years old now. When she was 5, I was looking for schools for her. And the nice thing about schools in the US is that they allow you to tour various classrooms. So this is something that there's a photograph that I took of a third grade classroom and what they were learning in reading comprehension. And so hopefully some of you can read this. But essentially in RC, they were looking at how to compare and contrast statements, how to figure out author's purpose, how to do cause and effect reasoning, how to differentiate between facts and opinions, how do you make inferences when you read, how to figure out the main idea and details, and how to draw conclusions. The strategies, these were the skills that they were building. The strategies that they were using were, how do you make connections? How do you do predictive reading? How do you ask questions about what you've read? How do you summarize a paragraph and visualize the information that you've learned? When I read this, I realized this is very similar to what we are trying to teach. Yes, our passages are a bit more complex, but essentially the strategies, the skills that we're trying to build with our students or in our students, they're very similar. How many of you learned this in third grade? Very few, right? My daughter right now can actually get 80 percentile. She's 11 years old, by the way. She's not studied using our courses, but she can get, by virtue of what she has learned in her school, she can get 80 percentile in RC and about 65 percentile in sentence correction, just because how they're taught. So the advantage that you have on the quant section is the similar advantage that natives have on the verbal section. And the beauty of the GMAT is because it's a very logic-based test, um, you know, if you work on improving your ability in verbal, you can really improve to a 90 plus percentile in verbal fairly easily. Now, to prove to you what are the core skills that exist in verbal, I'm going to make you solve a bold-faced question. As a bold-faced question, and again, I'm going to give you 4 minutes to solve this. So you're going to get ample time to solve this question. So don't worry about timing. Take your time to solve this and select the correct answer choice. About that, guys, just use the poll question on the right. Um,
All right, guys, last 15 seconds, get those answers in. Okay, 3, 2, and 1. Let's end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. So choices C and D really popular. Other than that, choices A and E somewhat popular. Choice B is the least popular choice. Okay, let's see how we do this. So tell me, how did you approach this question? How did you approach this question? So based on the answers that I see over here, I see two different approaches. One is the process of elimination and the other is the process of selection. The difference is process of elimination means that, hey, you're focusing on, okay, which one seems to be the best answer, and process of selection is to really say, hey, I know what the correct answer should do, and then let's kind of look at the answer choices and see which one seems to be the correct answer. And let's see how we go about doing that. So at EGMAT, how we answer bold-faced questions is we first, read a bold-faced question always has an argument, so it'll have a conclusion, and we first read the argument and understand the conclusion, and then we classify every statement with regards to it. As we do that, we also create what we call as the structure of the argument, and which means what does each statement do with regards to the main conclusion. Then we pre-think the roles played by bold-faced statements, and we have a standard terminology on how we pre-think. And once we do that, we analyze the option statements to really see, hey, which option statement is technically correct based on the understanding that we have from the argument. Okay, so let's kind of try and do that overall. And I want to thank you guys for your participation. The 35 responses to a short answer part, really great. So let's look at statement number 1. Statement number 1 says stock prices of companies that exceed $100 billion in revenue, also called extremely large caps, rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. So what does this statement say? It says that there are these companies called ELCs and their stock prices rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. So what is that? It is a data point, it's an observation, or it's a fact. Now, what is a fact? A fact is a statement which in the context of the argument you don't question. So if you take something as is, you take that as a fact. A lot of the information that the author gives you in arguments, and authors will give you information so that you have a background. That information is those pieces of information, they're typically facts. And let's look at the second statement. It says it is commonly thought that this happens because the company is too big to grow faster than the overall market. Now, what is this entire piece? When you look at this entire statement, that is a fact. When you look at the portion that I've bolded just to highlight it, is that portion over here is an opinion or a belief, and this opinion or a belief is there to explain fact A, which is why is it that ELCs rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. So people believe, remember, it is commonly thought means people believe that this happens because these companies are too big to grow faster than the overall market. Now let me ask this. When you see the word it is commonly thought, what do you infer from this? What do you infer from this statement? It is commonly thought. It's an opinion, yes. Whose opinion is it? As some of you said, it's a general belief. Okay, whose opinion is it? It's a general belief. It may not be author's opinion. We don't know that. The author is I've not said that this is my opinion. He said that it is commonly thought, which means many people think that this happens. Okay, it is commonly thought means many people think that this happens because of this. Now the author might completely disagree with that. We don't know of any of that, but what we can definitely say is that this is not author's opinion, not as of yet, as we know of from reading the argument. Okay, now some of you are saying, okay, if there is a belief in here, why do we say that the overall thing is a fact? Let's understand that. Okay, a fact is something that is not questioned in the context of the argument. It's a data point that the author gives you. An opinion is something what someone thinks, or something that's questionable. Okay, and things such as it is 15 degrees outside, that's a fact. Why? Because it's proven, and you can really say it's a specific thing. When you say it's cold outside, different people may have different opinions of what cold is. So that's kind of how we commonly think about fact versus opinions. In the context of GMAT, it's slightly different. Now let's look at this statement. According to Business Week, Wharton is better than Harvard. Okay, now when you look at this statement and you really say, I'm going to evaluate this statement in its entirety, what is this? Are you going to question the according to Business Week part? Or are you going to really say that no, according to Business Week, Wharton is not better than Harvard? No, you're not going to question that, because if the author is telling you, according to Business Week, Wharton is better than Harvard, you're not going to really dispute the fact whether Business Week said something or not. What you may dispute is whether, according to you, Wharton is truly better than Harvard or not. So you may dispute Business Week's opinion, but you're not going to dispute the according to Business Week thing. So when the entire statement is taken into consideration, it's a fact, but when you look at the bolded portion, it is an opinion. Can you guys see that? All right. So when you look at this, it is commonly thought that this happens because the company is too big to grow faster. Are you going to dispute whether it's commonly thought or not? No, you're not going to dispute that. So that entire statement becomes a fact, but the portion after that is an opinion. And this differentiation, even though it's not tested in this question, is really important to understand, because this is a semi-difficult question or a 650 level question. As questions become more difficult, the GMAT will test these things. Okay, now let's look at the next statement. It says, however, studies show that ELCs that provide higher returns in the market over a 5-year period, a majority of them are run by their founders. So you have two new pieces of information. Both of them you're not going to question. So both of them are fact. Why? Because first, author mentions that, hey, there are ELCs that provide higher returns in the market over a 5-year period. There are these companies that exist. Okay, and the second is, there's a characteristic that seems common to most of these companies, that a majority of them are run by their founders. Now, one other thing that I want to point out, whenever you see a relative pronoun in a critical reasoning question, always read that carefully. Be wary of the segmentation impact. This portion over here doesn't talk about all ELCs, but only that select group of ELCs that provide higher returns than the market. Okay. Then the author goes on to say, since most ELCs are under professional management that is inherently risk averse, again, we have some interesting data points over here, some facts. Prior to reading the statement, we did not know that A, most ELCs are under professional management, and B, that professional management is inherently risk averse. So these are two data points that we'll not question. The study's findings strongly suggest that the real reason why most ELCs don't beat the market is not that they're too big to grow, but rather that they're run by professional management that is too risk averse. What is this? This is the author's conclusion. The second boldface is the reason why the author believes that ELCs don't grow or don't beat the market. And when you think about it, this reasoning over here, it refutes the accepted belief. What is the accepted belief? What is this accepted belief that I'm talking about, guys? The accepted belief is that ELCs are too big big to grow. Yes, size causes performance. Although I wouldn't really put it that way, but yeah, you get the thing, the common thought. That is great. So now that we understand the argument really well, we understand the structure of the argument really well, let's kind of quickly go through this. This is the author's conclusion. This is a data point that supports the author's conclusion. This also supports the author's conclusion. Why? Because both of these statements 3 and 4 make the conclusion more believable. The first statement is the context or a fact on which the general belief about ELCs is based, and the second statement, is a common opinion that is refuted, or contains a common opinion that is refuted by the author in his main conclusion. So when you think about the boldface statements, boldface 1 is a characteristic of the companies that buck the trend. It is a data point, or which is a fact, which is provided to support the author's conclusion. Can you guys see that? It's a characteristic of the company that buck the trend. It's also a data point that makes the author's conclusion more believable. Boldface 2 is why we see the observed trend. Why is it that ELCs don't grow? It's also the belief that the author has with regards to the observation that is made over here. It is also the main conclusion of the argument. That's boldface 1 and boldface 2. So let's now evaluate the answer choices. Okay. Remember, boldface 1 said the first is it's a fact provided to support the author's conclusion. So let's look at the answer choices. Choice A says the first is a claim. Okay. Remember, the first is a majority of them are run by their founders, the accuracy of which is at issue in the argument. Is the first a claim or a fact? Remember, fact and claim are two mutually exclusive buckets. So it's a fact, so that's wrong. Do we doubt the accuracy of first? Do we say no, a majority of them are not run by their founders? No, we don't doubt the accuracy of first. Because this is wrong, we say choice A is wrong. Now let's go to choice E for elephant. Choice E says the first provides evidence to refute something. What? An explanation that the argument favors. Another term for the explanation that the argument favors is a claim or a conclusion. Okay. Now in this argument, there's just one conclusion, which is the main conclusion of the argument, which the author derives. And what it's really saying is the first statement refutes the main conclusion, if you were to simplify this. So my question to this is, does the first statement go against the main conclusion? No. It actually makes it stronger. It strengthens it. It doesn't agree with it. Agreeing with it is something different. It actually makes it stronger. Okay. So because of this word refute, choice E is wrong. So A and E are gone. Let's look at choice D, D for delta. The first choice D says the first is evidence, and evidence is okay, that has been used to support something, an explanation that the argument challenges. Which explanation does the argument challenge, guys? Which explanation over here does the argument challenge? Okay, general belief, too big to grow. Yes. Absolutely. Now, my question really is, a majority of them are run by their founders. Does it support too big to grow? Or does it go against that? Does it support or does it go against it? It goes against it. It provides evidence that no, they're not too big to grow. In fact, there are these companies which are run by their founders that grow faster than the overall market. So ELCs aren't too big to grow. It's just that they're run by the wrong management. And because of this part over here, choice D for delta is wrong, which brings us to the correct choice, which is C. Let's look at what choice C says. Choice C says the first is evidence. Evidence is okay. That has been used to support something. What? An explanation that the argument favors. We already said an explanation that the argument favors. An argument is nothing but the conclusion. The sole purpose of writing any argument is to further the conclusion. And does the first support the main conclusion of the argument? Does the first support? Absolutely. So this is correct, this is correct, this is correct. Okay, and then it goes on to say the second is that explanation. The second is the main conclusion. So every aspect of choice C is correct, which makes choice C the correct answer. Here's how you guys did. 34% of you marked it correct. Choice D, you can really see why it is incorrect, and 37% of you marked it correct over there. Okay, I'll explain D again because many of you chose that. So let me just put some text. According to D, what D says is the first statement supports which aspect? An explanation that the argument challenges, which is too big to grow. And forgive the caps over here, guys. It was easier. That's how it came out first for me. So an explanation that the argument challenges is too big to grow. And look at this, and you read statement number 1 and say, hey, does it support too big to grow? Does it make me believe more in the fact that ELCs are too big to grow? And when you do that, you're going to find that the answer to that is no. It doesn't support too big to grow. In fact, it refutes that. It proves that there are companies, when these companies are run by their founders, they actually grow faster than the overall market. Those who chose choice D, can you really see why this aspect is wrong? And again, remember, my goal over here was not to teach you boldface. My goal over here was to expose the core skills that are needed to ace boldface. So through this question, that's what we're going to do. But if you want to learn boldface, we have an excellent concept and an excellent application file as a part of our free trial. You can do that, and that goes from really grounds up to teaching you boldface questions. So let's understand the core skills that were tested in this argument. The first core skill which is there is fact versus claim. How can you classify a statement overall? And more details, is it one of these things? The second is, how does it relate to the conclusion, whether it supports or refutes? We saw many choices did that. The third is, how do the statements relate by themselves to each other? Again, whether they actually go together, or whether they're independent, or whether they go against each other. And then you saw the answer choices were fairly complex. They had essentially many clauses in there. The ability to dissect those clauses, the ability to look at segments and to really evaluate the logic of the argument against those segments is also a core skill. If you're an EGMAT student, this is where you're going to learn these core skills over here in the concept files and the application files and boldface, and then also in the foundation files for argument, which are the premise and conclusion files. When it comes to the relationships, you're also going to look at the strengthen and weaken files overall, as well as Scholaranium for practice. And when it comes to evaluating the answer choices, our practice files, our OG solutions, as well as the questions in Scholaranium. Now, let's look at how the answer choices play on these core skills. The portions in red, they are the ones which are incorrect. And you can really see, this is choice A, how it plays on. The first is a claim. A claim plays on your ability to classify a statement. The accuracy at which is an issue in the argument plays on the logical structure of the argument. Choice B said the first is an objection, which again is your ability to classify a statement, which is raised against what opposition defended in the argument. That's your logical structure again. Choice D for delta again played on the logical structure of the argument and linking both statements. And choice E played on the logical structure as well. Now, can you really see how, first of all, the incorrect answer choices exploit your lack of core skills? A, can you see that? If you knew how to classify a statement, you would have rejected choices A and B directly. If you had the correct logical structure, you could have rejected and gone down to the exact correct answer choice. Guys, you there? And again, as you improve on these core skills, you can see that your ability overall to answer such questions is going to improve. One other thing that I want. Do you see that these core skills are as systematic as the core skills that we saw in word problems? You need to be able to identify the conclusion. You need to be able to classify a statement. You need to be able to draw that logical structure. It's very similar to a word problem questions. It's a bit longer, but you don't have to do any math in it. It's purely logic. And that's how every aspect of GMAT verbal is. What is the difference between skills and shortcuts? Oh, huge difference. A skill is a method or an understanding that allows you, that basically allows you to answer anything that's thrown at you. If you know how to classify a statement as a fact or a claim, regardless of essentially what's thrown at you, you'd be able to classify this. A shortcut is something that you apply without understanding why that is right or wrong. You really say, hey, if you see a certain word in a passage, or for example, one of the shortcuts that a lot of people think is extreme answer choices, terms such as all are always incorrect. Okay, or there was some shortcut which people learned where we said that certain terms are never correct in a sentence correction answer choice. There you had no logic. Being is incorrect. Actually, that is absolutely wrong. Being is not always incorrect. We've written an article. So where we've really said, hey, being on GMAT is not always incorrect. And we've provided evidence on that. So that's a shortcut, which is a really bad shortcut. And people who don't know stuff, GMAT instructors who don't study the GMAT will teach you that. Take a look at that, and you're going to find 5 or 6 official sentences where being is correct and over there. So that's a shortcut. On the GMAT, shortcuts will kill you. Skills will help you. And a lot of people will try and teach you shortcuts because they'll make you believe that, hey, using these shortcuts, you can have an advantage that is only available to you. But the GMAT's a very well defined test. It's a professional organization that conducts the test. They make sure they weed out all these shortcuts. Yeah, strong keywords must. People will tell you that essentially must is never correct. I can show at least 7 official questions on which must is correct. Again, if you want to, when you're looking at critical reasoning or reading comprehension, that the test is evaluating your ability. It's not figuring out how good you know the stats on incorrect answer choices. No, that's not the purpose of the test. So when you say strong keywords such as must or all these are always incorrect, you are doing yourself a disservice. So let's summarize all of this. If you want to get to that 760 score, you need to figure out how much time you need and get a realistic estimate using a tool such as GMAT Planner. And if you need more time, create more time. And the 2 ways to doing that is taking some time off work or making sure you take some time off, create some time from your personal life. Make sure you have a solid strategy. Make sure you get good resources. A lot of people think I'm going to practice questions from the official guide and that's going to be enough. The official guide is supposed to expose you to the kind of questions that you're going to see on the GMAT. It's not a resource to help you build core skills. It's a must, but it's not enough. It's what I call as it's necessary, but not sufficient. Okay. So get good professional resources and focus on building these core skills. and then understand that GMATs are test of ability, and then you figure out ways to assess this every 30 to 40 hours. So with that, let's see how do you get a good score on the GMAT? How do you create that trackable study plan so that you don't have to worry about studying for 200 hours and really saying, okay, taking a mock test and saying, am I going to get to that 730, 740 score? But rather, every 30 to 40 hours, you can really see whether you're on the right track or not. And to be able to do that, let's understand how the GMAT actually works. The GMAT's a very logical exam. Your score out of 800 is built of two abilities, one in verbal and one in quant. Your verbal abilities are composed of different sub-abilities, or we call as subsectional abilities. Your verbal score has three almost equal subsectional abilities, one each in sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. And on the quant side, you see the corresponding stuff as well. So essentially, if you draw inferences from this, acing the GMAT it's not rocket science. It's actually fairly easy. It's very measurable, very predictable. And then if you measure your improvement or get to these abilities at this grassroots level, you can almost predict what you're going to get your verbal score. And similarly, on the quant side, you can predict your quant score. And if you have a certain quant and a verbal score, it more or less leads to a certain GMAT score. Okay. And that's the model of architecture of our offerings. That's how it's built on. And that's why we rarely will tell you that an average EGMATer improves about 75 points on the scale of 800, or about 10 points on a scale of 60 on verbal, and about 45 points on quant, or about 6 to 7 points on a scale of 60. Now, the reason why it's lower, fewer points in quant is because many people who join our courses, they don't have enough headroom to go beyond 45 points. Those who join at Q39 or so, they have a lot more headroom and they do improve 10 points or more. And we track this, we guarantee this improvement, and we actually give you tools to measure this improvement even before you take the test. Most of the other prep companies, they don't track this, they won't guarantee this improvement. And the reason for that is because their learning architecture is not built around the architecture of the GMAT. You think about how their learning architecture is, what you really see is that when you join a traditional test prep, regardless of whether it's an online course or a classroom course, you get a bunch of learning material, and many of them provide books, and 80% of all learning and pretty much all of conceptual learning happens over there. Now, there is no way to ensure when 1,000 people go through a chapter in a book doesn't tell you whether to each one of those 1,000 folks, whether they've learned to that level of proficiency that is required or not. Then you typically go in a classroom, and you go in a classroom, you have a teacher who has one-to-many model. Now, there are very few good GMAT teachers over there, and even those who are good, they don't understand how to use data to evaluate every student in a classroom. Now, you go through a bunch of classrooms, you learn application over there. Once you've gone through a bunch of classroom sessions, you take a mock test. That is truly the first time that in a traditional test prep that they actually evaluate you completely. And when you get a mock test, you take a mock test, you get a score, but that onus of analysis is primarily with the student to figure out, hey, what should I focus on next? So when you think about the GMAT and how the traditional test prep and how the traditional test prep, their learning architecture aligns with that of the GMAT, what you're going to find is that this alignment only happens at that highest level. There's no alignment at any of the other levels with regards to tracking. And then there's very little feedback overall at preparation stages. And because of this, for many students, it leads to a lot of rework. People get frustrated, and many people just give up. They start with a target score of 740, 750, but in the end, they really say, I'm happy with a 660, 670, despite going through the entire curriculum multiple times. Do you guys see that happen, folks who've gone through a traditional test prep? You get this feedback at the mock test level, but essentially beyond that, during the preparation, it doesn't tell you whether you're doing well or not. So when we created e-GMAT, we really said there has to be a better way, and that's when we looked at the private tutoring based architecture, and we really said, hey, that's a much better architecture. You get a lot more feedback. So So how can you build a similar offering which gives that level of feedback but is not as expensive? Remember, a good private tutor is about $150 or so per hour. And that's when we created this architecture of integrated learning and feedback at conceptual level, at an application level, and at a module level or so. So we created courses where you get feedback on your ability to on how well you've learned the concept and how well can you apply the concept. And so essentially when you do that, you see this alignment not just at the subsectional level, which is a sentence correction or a critical reasoning level, but also within that, we give you feedback on subject verb, on modifiers and parallelism, and you can get that analysis right then and there. And so if you do well if you learn modifiers well, if you learn parallelism well, if you learn comparisons well, there's no reason why your ability in sentence correction would be lower. But if you don't do that well in the course itself, you will definitely see that your ability in sentence correction is lower. So you get that feedback essentially while studying. And again, why is that important? Because you don't get to 90 percentile just by knowing what a modifier does and how to place a modifier correctly, but you get to that 90 percentile by perfecting that knowledge and by being able to apply that knowledge. And it's only when you perfect that knowledge that you get to that 740 odd score. And here's an example of a student who went from 40th percentile in sentence correction to the 90th percentile overall on the actual, from a first attempt to the second attempt. Imagine 40th percentile in a V31 to 99th percentile in a 760 and a V41. That's an amazing improvement. So how does this happen? What are the various elements that lead to that success? One is a method. The focus on application, the focus on giving you feedback on your ability to apply ensures that when 1,000 people go through our courses, they learn the same method. They basically know what you need to do in step one, what do you need to do in step two, and they get feedback on where they're faltering. Then you get insights even at the conceptual level with video lessons and in the ability quizzes every 30 hours. When you think about it, these things don't exist overall. The reason why we offered this was because we built the technology, we built the content to give you this feedback. No other prep company offers that. And then, that those personalized study plans, if you look at skill data in Scholarinium, so we talked about core skills, you also get skill data in Scholarinium. And then you can create custom quizzes to focus on the areas that you're weak in. So if let's say you're weak in strengthen and weaken, you can go revise the module and create a custom quiz just in strengthen and weaken questions, and you can really verify whether you've improved or not. And again, how is this personalization enabled? Let's look at the verbs module over here. What you really see is you first learn verbs, you learn the concepts over here, and you get feedback on how well you've learned. Then you have level 1 application over here. Again, you get feedback as well. Then you learn level 2 concepts or slightly more advanced concepts in conditional and subjunctive. You again get insights on how well you've learned. And then you have level 2 application and insights on that as well. Now the beauty of this is when you think about this and really say, hey, this guy got 60% in this practice quiz, and you say, what's causing that 60%? That doesn't seem really great. You can actually look at the quizzes and say, this guy has these gaps in your preparation. And by focusing and revising this and taking that quiz again, you can go from that 60th percentile to that 90th percentile in just about an hour. Try doing that even with a personal tutor, because even a personal tutor won't track this improvement. So overall, this effectiveness is not just because of these impactful video lessons, but and the fact that we have that process and that feedback, but it's because of these insights that we provide you, where you can really see how you can personalize your journey to that 760 score. We get about 10,000 students a year. Each one of them goes through a different journey to their target scores, and the architecture enables that. With that, I've come to the end of this session. The key takeaways that I want to make sure that you have is that when it comes to the GMAT, have a study plan and understand it tests your ability. And the ability comes from building those core skills, not from shortcuts. And as you build your study plan, make sure you list out areas where you need major effort. And as you do that, you consistently personalize your journey to that target score. As Mansi said, have a plan, execute on it, and be ready to adapt that plan to what you see who seems to be working and what doesn't seem to be working. If you want to get to that 760 score, you need to be nimble. You need to have that flexible mindset. Take a look at our free trial, and if you need help, you can write to me at rajat@gmat.com. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. It was a pleasure conducting this webinar. Your participation was phenomenal. We got so many answers in the short answer pod. I was just keeping a track of that. We had about 3,000 odd responses in the short answer pod, and poll questions, another 1,500 or so. So that was really, really nice. Thank you very much. And with that, if you can give me some feedback on the webinar, that would be great. And I'll also give you the session PDF. And here's the batch calendar as well. Okay, and again, remember we have the quant workshop tomorrow, and we have our sentence correction webinar next week. Let me also share those links. Here are those links as well. And again, you can post your question in the Q&A pod. Okay, what are the core skills for RC? RC, one of the major core skills is your ability to comprehend. So, and how do you go about comprehending? Is by making sure you read slowly, you follow the keywords, and then you get completely immersed in the passage. If you write to us, we'll be happy to send a recording of the RC webinar that we conducted last weekend. So again, write to us at rajat@gmat.com. Ankit says, how do you select? How do you figure out what chances you have to get into Wharton? So Ankit, there are three ways to going about doing that. One is to what we call as how do you find your resume twin. So if you look at LinkedIn, you can really figure out people who've studied at Wharton and who are studying at Wharton. Let me give you an article. So here's an article by one of our partners, Maria Wickwilla, who's a Harvard Business School graduate, who has written this article on how to determine your odds. Okay, so that's something that you can take a look at, and this will really tell you how to go about doing that. And then let me get another article. There's one other article that you may find useful. How do you improve your profile? Okay, are there any good schools who give admission to highly experienced candidates with scholarship, without scholarship, say with 15 years of experience? And so a lot of B schools will consider candidates who have high experience. I mean, 2 years ago, I went to UCLA Anderson. the older student in their full-time MBA class was 48 years old. IMD Switzerland, the average age of incoming class is about 31, 32 years. Uh, so those schools definitely are really good schools. I mean, pretty much every school has a few folks who are in their late 30s and early 40s. And then some of those people may be from defense background, others maybe because they did realize late in their career that they need an MBA to go to that next step. The key to getting admissions and to getting those scholarships is to make sure that you can prove to these schools that an MBA is the next right step, and you can in your career, and then you can prove that an MBA will provide an ROI. If you're able to do that, then you're golden. So PS, hopefully that helps you. Actually, there's an article as well that we really did. And there you can see some examples of our students who've done this MBA after 30. And Sonali says, I scored a Q49 and V36, and she probably is an EGMAT student because she's saying, as per verbal scholarinium, my individual's abilities are 83 in SC, 75 in CR, and 63 in RC. Main issue is timing. I'm giving the GMAT in 30 days. So Sonali, first of all, congratulations on scoring a 700. That's a really good starting point. I would say focus on reading strategies, focus on practicing questions, but if you want a more deep dive improvement plan, then you can write to our support team. Our customer success team would be happy to sit down with you and help you create a personalized plan to go from that 700 to that 740 score. Do we also evaluate admission essays? No, we don't. We have partners who really do that, and they do an excellent job. Apart from GMAT, what else is required for an admission? You need a letter of recommendations, you need your essays, you need the other aspects of your application. Again, we can tell you if you write to us, and we can send you what else is required. Does having a non-IT job help, and do Indian females have better chances than Indian males? Statistically, yes. Having a non-IT job is helpful if you've shown leadership. I mean, what these schools care about is your ability to navigate across change, your ability to really lead other people into direction which makes sense for an organization. Okay. Whether working for JP Morgan will help in getting admitted depends on what you did at JP Morgan. I mean, if you were back-end support, then probably not. But if you were into their core banking operations or core investment banking operations, then definitely yes, it will. How do you know a question is a 650 or a 700 question? You don't care about it when you're taking the test. When you're studying, we tell you whether a question is a 600 or a 700 level question. Chandrasekhar says, is it really good to pursue an MBA from Germany? I'm an automobile background, so is it right to do it? If you want to be in the automobile industry, Germany is a really good place. German MBAs are really good if you want to study, work over there post-studying. So it's very, very cost effective. Some really good business schools in Germany. Having said that, if you want to work, if you don't want to work in mainland Europe, if you want to work elsewhere, then I would recommend either choosing a more internationally recognized business school such as INSEAD or IESC or ESAD or LBS, or looking at a USB school. So it just depends on what you want post your MBA. Right after your MBA, if you want to work there, then yes, it's a really good place to do an MBA from. Very cost effective. I'm 21, so are there any good? Is age a factor? Age isn't a factor, Ankit. Your experience will be a factor. I mean, 21. When you say 21, What I hear is indirectly is that you don't have a lot of experience, and that now starts to become a factor. But if you've worked full time for 4 years while studying, while doing your undergrad, then yes, you're fine. Indian IT male to get into Ivy League schools, what kind of GMAT scores needed? I would say 740 or higher. I mean, we've had students who've gotten into Columbia, Wharton, and all with 740 or so. Let me see if I can. Here's a guy who received an admit from Ross in Columbia over here. Let me see if I can. Sandeep can give you a few more. Good schools for product management. UCLA Anderson's really good. Berkeley Haas is very good. Again, depends on what kind of product management you're talking about. So I'm assuming technology, but if you want to go more mainstream into consumer products, then and your Kellogg's really good as well. UCLA Anderson in general is good for product management. Tuck tends to be very good for in general product management and consulting. IE Business School, I'd say it's really good. For online MBA, I don't know. Sorry, let me read this. For online MBA, I'll have to do some research and figure out the technology that they use. But overall, the regular programs really good. Very, very good salaries post that. I think we have. We have some stuff over here where you can really look at class profiles as well for various schools and compare. Eight years of experience, average score 690 will make a cut at ISB. You may or you may not. Again, I'll have to really look at what's there in that experience, but you may or you may not. I mean, you have a decent chance is what I would say. I won't reject the 690 score. Do relevant online certifications, do they help in building a profile? To a certain degree, it says that you're not one-dimensional, but depends on how you've used the knowledge gained from those certifications in your job. If you've done that, definitely yes. And if those certifications are towards where you want to go post your MBA. So classic cases, a lot of people say, hey, I'm doing a CFA level 1, level 2, level 3, and it's going to help me with my MBA. Getting an admit into an MBA. The answer is yes and no. Why? Because when you're going for an MBA, what they care about is okay, have you shown leadership skills in your job in addition to getting those CFA level certifications? If you have, then that's great. But if you have not, then that CFA certification doesn't add. So it just adds beyond once you have those necessary leadership skills. And what it adds is to really say that if you have a CFA level 1, level 2, or level 3, and you say, I want to go in finance, then B school officers know that, hey, you're serious about finance because your prior steps show that. So again, purely certifications don't help without any evidence of you being able to apply that knowledge. Okay, Akash Ali says, not able to give up on questions, feel the need to try to get it right. How do I ensure a good score? Akash Ali, you've got to figure out, you've got to get into the habit of, okay, if after a minute to a minute to 15 seconds, you don't know where this question is going, give up on it because it's going to kill you. I've seen so many students with really good abilities and they mess up their exams because they don't give up on questions. So you have to tell yourself. And the way to do that is take a couple of mock tests where you practice this and you're going to find that you score a lot higher on those mock tests. Are students from India differentiated from Indian ethnicity, someone who's grown up in the US and a US passport holder with Indian parents? Yes, absolutely. So you're considered an Indian only if you need an H-1B sponsorship. So if you are someone who's on a green card over in the US, or you are a Canadian citizen, even though you may be from an Indian ethnicity, you're not considered an Indian. So only if you need an H-1B, which also means you may be in the US for 7 years, but if post your MBA you still need an H-1B, you'll be grouped with the folks who are coming from India. GMAT score for MBA STEM programs for Indian female, again, depends on the programs, but 720 is something which I would always say is a safe score. Simon, in the US, it depends on what you want to do post your MBA. So yeah, I mean, like classic case in point is Babson, which is the school that I went to. I'd say if you want to be an entrepreneur, probably the best school over there, with the exception of Stanford. But if you want to go into general management, not the best school. Similarly, Arizona State University, even though not very highly ranked, gives full fellowships to everyone. Really great school in supply chain management, but not so good in marketing. So it depends on what you want to do. And these schools are recognized in these areas. So ASU gets a lot of folks what shall I say? A lot of companies come for supply chain to ASU. Okay, let me just look at this. So there's a question student who says, I've enrolled into the online course at EGMAT. Should I purchase the live sessions? Again, I need to really see why you need to purchase the live sessions, and write to us, and that's something that we'll be able to tell you. But the key reasons why you would need live sessions is because A, if you need to have more application, B, if you want to learn as a part of a group, if you like the free session, you're going to love the paid sessions because it's 3 to 4 times as interactive as the free session is. And you are a part of the group, so you guys learn together, you guys come to the sessions together. There's that camaraderie that you develop, which again, as a part of the online course, you don't do that because you don't interact with other students. And then the feedback, the real-time feedback is really valuable, where when you make a mistake, you learn from some of the top world's best instructors, and when you make a mistake, the instructor can point out why you made a mistake, where you made a mistake, how you're going wrong in your thought process. So that real-time feedback is very valuable. Do you recommend any vendors for application support? So we recommend working with, depending on what you want to do. So if you want what is equivalent to e-GMAT in the application world, we recommend Applicant Lab. If you want to work with a full-time admission consultant, who's a top-rated admission consultant, we recommend Poonam at MySA Review. If you want to go for ISB, we recommend ISB Mantra. So yeah, depends on where you want to go, and we can provide a recommendation. Ankit says, this is just curious. You said you purchased the house within the year post your MBA. What was your salary then? So Ankit, when we purchased our house post my MBA, it was not from my salary. It was from my internships, the money that I saved. Because remember, I said I had full fellowship, so I didn't have to pay anything to the school. So I made about 45 grand in my second year doing my internships, and yeah, so a good chunk of that went towards the down payment for the house. And as the post-MBA salary was in line with what the post-MBA salary is out of Babson, is all I would say. But then primarily it was because of what I did during my second year, the internships. Kellogg for an Indian female, 730, Radhika or 740 or so. Excuse me, guys. Okay, guys, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. It was really good to conduct this webinar. You guys were really energetic, participated very enthusiastically. Your answers made a lot of sense. So thank you for taking the time out and joining me in this webinar today. It was really good. I hope to see some of you on egmat.com. And yeah, good luck and study well, and don't give up on your MBA dream.